everybody. Welcome to the Underwater Photography Show. I'm Matthew Sullivan.
And I'm Alex Mustard.
And today we're going to be discussing one of our mutual favorite dive destinations, God's Pocket Resort, way off the top of Vancouver Island in the Pacific Northwest. This is prompted a bit because I have the opportunity to bring a group there in early or late March 2025. So if anybody's interested, all of my links are down in the show notes, or you guys probably know me anyway, some way to get a hold of me.
And you're too excited by the prospect that we had to talk about it.
Yeah. God's Pocket is legitimately one of my favorite places. I've been there several times, and every time I'm there, as soon as I'm done, I want to go right back. It's aesthetically beautiful topside. It's aesthetically beautiful underwater. And I'm a cold water guy at heart, so that was actually the first cold water trip I ever did was God's Pocket. So
maybe that's a good place for us to start, is actually for information for people, because it's a famous place. It's a lot of people have heard about it, but let's talk about the cold and kind of how cold, what it involves. Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada, all three of those don't say hot. So this is cold water diving. It's not like diving in polar water. It's, in the middle of kind of dry suit range. There's a lot warmer dry suit diving, but there's colder dry suit diving than this. In Celsius, I'll do the Celsius, you do the Fahrenheit. It's usually the dives there between 8 and 10 degrees whenever I've been there, which in Celsius is kind of like 44.
Yeah, so Fahrenheit, it's usually the coldest I've seen there was 43. The warmest I've seen there was 49. So it's in that range. So like you said, there's warmer dry suit diving. There's also much colder dry suit diving. So if anybody who's been to like Iceland or Antarctica or any of those places, if you can handle that, you can handle God's Pocket. Yeah.
But I would say that when you go to God's Pocket, you spend more time in the water than a lot of cold water destinations. Partly because it's damn amazing, you don't want to get out, but partly because, it does run a bit like a tropical destination. It is that 3 to 4 dives a day. You can dive, most of the dives about an hour. So, it's a lot of minutes in the water in the day. And I think so it's not like sometimes, here in the UK in the winter, it's that cold and we'll go and we'll do 1 or 2 dives in a day. And like, oh yeah, it was fine. But this is, you're going there, you're going to do 3 to 4 dives a day, every day for, 5, 6 days, however long your stay is. And I think you need to be prepared for that with the gear.
Yeah.
So just to deal with the cold off the bat.
Fortunately, they load you up on food pretty good, so you can keep yourself nice and warm that way as well. But yeah, dry suits, thick undergarments. Yeah. And they always have, warm muffins and hot chocolate or coffee in between dives, which helps give you that little bit of warmth back if you're not leaving the boat in between the dives.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about the resort. Actually, it's probably quite another good thing to tick off early on. Is God's Pocket Resort is a off the grid, small wooden resort built on its own little island in this marine wonderland area. I guess it's about 8 bungalows. I'm not really sure how many there are. 8 rooms.
14 people or something like that.
Yeah, so something around this, maybe 7 rooms. Clustered around a restaurant. There's like a library, social room as well, and then there's a dive center area. The restaurant sort of eating area. It's home cooking, but it's very varied, tasty menu. They can cope with it's all cooked fresh. They can cope with different dietary requirements very comfortably. And I have to say that having taken workshop groups there, and I'm taking workshop groups back again next year as well, I know that people talk about the food there on all the trips in between. So I think everyone really enjoys the food there. I think a day out in the cold also sets you up to really enjoy a nice hearty feed at the end of it. And it's a really nice place to stay. They do have an internet connection these days, so you're not completely cut off, but you are in a place that generates its own electricity, captures its own water. So it is an off the grid type living situation. It is also a place where there isn't a dive shop nearby. FedEx or whoever can't deliver you the thing that you left behind. So
Yeah.
you do need to go there prepared for that remoteness.
Yeah.
Consider it more like a liveaboard in that respect, I would say.
Yeah, they do have like some spares and some ways to repair things too, but if you can bring extras of things you might need, O-rings,
Mm.
wrist seals, neck seals, things like that, it's better just to bring all that stuff, just in case. I had my suit tear a little bit the second trip I was there, and I had brought Aqua Seal and managed to seal it up, but it's no guarantee that they'll have it. So anything extra you can bring that's little, I would bring it because it only takes one little stupid thing to ruin your trip. So bring as many extra things as you can.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think particularly if you have a few friends in the group, if you're going with a group who are driving up, because people who
yeah,
live in kind of Seattle, Vancouver area or nearby, a lot of them prefer to drive up there than fly up there,
yeah,
and those are good people who are who are loading up trucks who really can bring those spares that can really help the group out. Because
yeah,
okay, one person might have a problem and you have the same problem, and suddenly whatever spare they had at the place is out of action.
yeah.
Anyway, we didn't come here to talk about the practicalities too much.
Yeah.
What really excites you, Matt, most? I mean, when you say underwater photography, diving in God's pocket, kind of what are all the visions, the images flashing through your mind?
So one of the things that I've always appreciated about God's Pocket is that not only is it packed with all sorts of interesting light. I mean, I'm sure there are giant Pacific octopus there, so I'm told. I've never seen one up there, but everybody else seems to. But you have those, you have war bonnets, you have wolf eels, you have giant the red Irish lords, grunt sculpins, and then you have all of that in very aesthetically pleasing places. So one thing I can compare it to other parts of Vancouver Island where I've dived, or even Washington, which have a lot of cool animals, but the underwater ecosystem isn't necessarily aesthetically beautiful. You have a lot of big rocks and boulders and mud flats and things like that. But up at God's Pocket, you have those crazy walls that plunge 1,000 feet. Every inch of it is covered in life, with whites and pinks and red, yellow, orange, all that kind of ridiculous color.
There is a
Huge.
pleasing aesthetic to it, isn't it? Because the seabed is visually dominated by a relatively few number of species, and I think that keeps it looking very neat. It looks almost like a garden, that it's someone planned to put the plumoses there and the yellow sponge here and the red soft coral there to make it, and so it is very attractive. And then towering above that is the bull kelp forest, which when the sun is out and the sun is coming through it, and there are rockfish lined up in it, it is visually stunning for wide angle.
And then you obviously have all the macro critters, which you can often get in colorful settings, which is really nice. You have that war bonnet in a yellow sponge image, and you have a bunch of cool war bonnet in various color images.
I know you like them, so not
I
yet.
do love war bonnets. But I mean, that's the kind of thing you can photograph up there, though, is you can photograph cold water subjects in colorful environments, which you can't always do necessarily. Like a lot of the places in Washington, you can find those same subjects, but they're in brown or gray environments. Whereas at God's Pocket, you have the advantage of getting them in potentially beautiful settings, which can
I
give
think
you.
very regularly so, because there's not the biodiversity of a tropical destination, but the abundance of life, the density of life is as high as anywhere you've been in the tropics, potentially higher. And so, I often joke, it's underwater photography without the swimming. Because you just go down, oh, look, I'll shoot that. Oh, look, I'll shoot that. Oh, I'll shoot that. I'll shoot that. I'll shoot that. And you, particularly the first time you're there and everything's new to you, it's just subject upon subject. And then you get picky and it's like, no, I want that subject on that background. And and that's why it's so great for photography. It reminds me, whenever I go there, it reminds me of Indonesia a little bit. And I know it's at a very different temperature range to Indonesia, but it's all the little islands with the smooth, calm water between them and these little wooded, forested islands remind me a little bit of Raja Ampat, for people who've been there. It reminds me of Raja Ampat in the early days because you don't see a lot of people up there. Raja Ampat now is a lot busier, both with boats but also with development on the islands. It's still very undeveloped, Raja Ampat, but it was when it, particularly 20 years ago, Raja Ampat really was just felt untouched everywhere. Anyway, but it also reminds me a bit of Lembe as well, because you've got the narrow strait, you've got the strong tides going through, and there's no doubt that those oceanographic conditions that unite those destinations for being amazing for diving, counting the cold water as much as the tropical water. Sheltered water, but flushed with large tidal movements.
Yeah.
And yeah, it creates that amazing abundance of life.
And one thing I think that also appeals to me about photographing in those kind of environments, especially up there, is admittedly God's Pocket's a popular place, but if you think about the number of people who dive there and photograph there versus somewhere like Lembe, you have so many more unique photographic opportunities, I feel, at a place like God's Pocket than you do at a place like Lembe, just because there's less images from there that exist. So you have opportunities for fresh takes on subjects that not a lot of people get to see, relatively speaking, which I think is really appealing. And next time I go back will be something I focus on a lot more. Because the first few times I went there, it's like, oh, there's so many cool things. And it wasn't necessarily about, a lot of it was about capturing the subject versus creating compelling pictures. And I have some pictures in there that I really like, but next time it'll be much more photographically focused.
I think on top of that as well, it's not just the number of people who get to go there. It's also the number of people that get to dive there, because they only have relatively few people diving there any week. They have a very short season. I've done plenty of years where I've done 100 dives in Raja Ampat in a year, or 100 dives in Lembe. Even if I do back-to-back trips to God's Pocket, I'm doing 30 dives or 40, 35, 40 dives max. So it's even when you do multiple trips there, you don't get a lot of time. That said, I do find the dives there very productive, because you like a Lembe, you often hardly move to go from one great subject to another. Also, it's not got crystal clear water. It's a temperate diving destination, but the visibility is rarely limiting for photography. So you're able to get relatively clean, strong images quite easily there. So I find that very productive. And then there is astonishing marine life of all sorts. And I think, we've focused on some of the A-list celebrity species like, wall bonnets or wolf eels or the GPOs. But there's a whole host of other animals, whether it's huge starfish or, whether it's, red Irish lords, which are really common, but they're just a great subject.
Yeah,
Giant plumose anemones are fantastic to shoot, and then there's so many different types of anemones up there. Really, really beautiful anemones. And then you drift up into the water column. You've got the rockfish in the kelp, which are just incredibly attractive. You've got jellies in the water. There's a lot to shoot, and it's always a very productive trip.
Yeah, that's what I would say. Is the big thing is it's incredibly productive. It's an incredibly productive trip photographically, and some of my favorite pictures of yours are from those trips, not just the war bonnets. But, and admittedly, it's because I am a fan of that diving in general versus warm water. But just because it's like you said, it's so productive, so you have so many opportunities to create compelling pictures.
But I love the warm water diving. I really love diving on coral reefs, but I love this just as much. And I'm not someone like, cold water's the best. I'm like, no, I just go there because it's so good. It's a great place to stay. So I think we should finish with a decent chunk of advice for anyone who's going there, whether they're coming with us or whether they're going there on their own, how to get the most out of it photographically, starting, I guess, with kind of, the right lenses to bring, the right gear to bring, spares to bring, and then a mindset to bring. So gear-wise, what were you likely to be taking? I mean, we're both shooting Sony at the moment, so quite a similar answer, I suspect.
Yeah, I would definitely bring a fisheye to capture some of those big grand scenes. And there's a lot of subjects there that are conducive to close focus wide angle shooting, like the red Irish lords or wolf eels, things like that. I preferred a longer macro lens there. I brought my 60 the first time and then left it at home the second time. So I shot a 105 on Nikon the first time I was there, and then a 105 the second time I was there. And then I'm very much looking forward to shooting some of those subjects with the EMWL. I think a lot of them would be really conducive to that. And I know you've brought one up there before.
Yeah, that was the last trip I did there was actually with the prototype pre-production 160,
Yeah.
which was great. I would say that I would like to comment on the EMWL, and that it's a great lens for that area. But I think the low light in that area makes the EMWL quite challenging, because the EMWL, to get reasonable depth of field, you need to close the aperture down. And when you close that aperture down, it can be quite hard to get a background, ambient light to come into the exposure without using a long exposure. I also think that some of the subjects are quite big. Like Red Irish Lord is actually, for me, a little bit on the big side for EMWL. And I think maybe Mini Dome or Nikonos 13mm is maybe a little bit more in the wheelhouse of that sort of subject. In terms of wide angle, I would definitely take fisheye. I take fisheye in it everywhere anyway. When I went last time, I didn't take the 13mm because I was also a bit baggage limited. I took the 8-15, but I took both a mini dome and my big dome for it. And my rationale was that I wanted the big dome to be able to do splits. I wanted the big dome for when you're out in the kelp forest and you haven't got a lot of light to play with. You need to maybe open the aperture a little bit to get some light into the shot, but you still want that image quality. So the big dome was good for that. Obviously, the Nikonos would be good for that too. But it couldn't do the splits, and I felt that I would. In the past, I'd really enjoyed doing a few splits there because you've got these lovely forested islands. So that's why I didn't take the Nikonos, but I would next time. I also took the mini dome because I think when the vis is maybe not so good, you get a few days of poorer vis or something. You want that ability to be right on top of the subjects, and I ended up using the mini dome more than the big dome on my last trip because we didn't have such good conditions for visibility. So as a result, I didn't do so many of the big kelp vistas I was expecting and went to the smaller dome. I didn't take the WACP there last time, again, because of baggage limitations. But several of the guys in my group who had them there used them a lot during the trip.
I was going to say, I think that would be a really good. I would love to bring one next time I'm up that way because the range of subjects you can see on one dive is pretty staggering.
Yeah.
And I think a WACP or WWL, whichever, would be really, really conducive up there to shooting, some wider stuff and then pulling in tight for smaller subjects or portraits.
Yeah. I will take the WACP if I've got the baggage allowance for it. Not only because it's better at open aperture shooting, or more open aperture than the WWL, but I also don't fancy like the fiddling around with getting the air bubbles off the back of the WWL. Yeah. Because you often go down, you're often over some deeper water. You've then got to take it off with gloves on, cold fingers, get the air bubbles out. So I think I would go WACP of those two.
Yeah.
I like longer macro lenses too, but I think both have a role to play there. If you do have the option of two, I think particularly if it's a bit swelly, there's a bit of water motion on some of the sites. The 60 can be easier to shoot with because it's every bit of the seabed there is covered in life. It's not a destination place where it's like muck diving and you can settle on the seabed. Now, in a dry suit, you are more supported, I think, than in a wetsuit. It kind of gives you buoyancy the whole length of your body. So it's once you get used to your dry suit diving, I think you do sometimes have more stability than when you're in wetsuit. But yeah, the God's Pocket, you've got to shoot your macro free swimming. And also, if you're on Browning Wall, which is one of the best macro sites and best wide angle sites, you can't lie down because it's like that, so you've got to be happy shooting your macro, not lying down on stuff, partly because everything's alive and partly because some of the sites just really don't let you anyway. And I think that the 60mm can be better for some people in that situation because they've got a nudie. It's easier to shoot by getting right on top of it with a 60 than being a little bit further back with a 100. We as Sony users, we have less of an issue because we've only really got the 90mm.
I would say one of the other things I love about God's Pocket is that you can dive their little house reef, which is not a reef at all. It's a dock with a bunch of really thick muck.
It's a house bay.
What's that?
House bay. It's a bay, isn't it? So
there's a lot of really cool stuff right in there too. You have grunt sculpins, warbonnets, octopus, ratfish, all that kind of stuff, just right off the house, the bay. And you can, they allow you to do night dives most nights down there as long as you have a buddy. And that's a really, really good dive site for working on specific things because it's shallow and you don't have to move very far to find a lot of cool subjects, similar to how it is kind of everywhere up there.
Yeah.
But the advantage of staying there is that you have access to that dive site, which I
Yeah.
think is a really worthwhile one. And
Absolutely.
then,
There's no doubt that there are species on that dive you don't see on any of the other dives.
yeah, like the mosshead warbonnets, for example, like
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't seen it decorated, but you don't see mossheads anywhere else up there except under that dock.
Mm.
So having those under there and giving time to work with them is really nice.
Well, having them completely reliable because you know you're going to see them.
Yeah, you know exactly where they're going to be.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and great nudies there, and yeah, all sorts. They're really cool.
the one other thing I would mention is for strobes, at least I think you're the same way, that you don't necessarily need the highest powered strobe you with the biggest light spread up there. Because, like you said, the visibility isn't always fantastic. There's a lot of particulate in the water. Often, at least when I've been there, it's been pretty
Mm.
mediocre viz. So having and it's dark, it's already darker, so you don't need a ton of power from your strobe. But whenever I've gone up there, I've used my Retro Originals, which it had a single rectangular flash tube, so much narrower beam, and then random various light restrictors, which I found worked really well because I wasn't shooting any huge reef scenes against the sun, and not really any big animals either. So
Mm.
um, I would
I
recommend.
prefer cooler color temperature strobes as well in that environment. So I actually added blue filters to my Retro Pros when I was up there last time to cool them down. Yeah, I've still got them actually. And the other thing I really wanted to mention was that last time I was up there, I used the 5T close up lens religiously on all my macro dives because you're not likely to be shooting things far away up there. So
Yeah.
I think that or something like the new MFO lens from Nauticam would be really valuable. There's not so much super macro, and I think a 5T or an MFO really gets to most subjects. I did carry the SMC quite a lot on the flip last time, but actually I found after a while I was hardly ever using it, and it just made my camera heavy, and so I did stop using it. I definitely though would say that I think I do use the flip filters up there, whereas in the tropics I'm very happy screwing my diopters on and off when I need them. Up there with the cold hands and everything, I use that. And then the only other thing I'd like to mention on the gear front for the thing is you need a really good focus light, and you need a spare battery for your focus light so that you can do multiple dives with it during the day. A lot of the time, I have to say, with modern cameras, you don't necessarily need the focus light on all the subjects up there. There is light. It's not like you're descending into blackness. But I do think there are some interesting subjects, and it's also, particularly if you're on the wall, there's overhangs, it's craggy, it's shady. The focus light can really help the autofocus. So it's good to have a focus light up there as part of your camera gear.
And speaking of spares, any spares you can bring for your camera gear in general up there is probably a good idea. Because like we talked about earlier, it's
Mm.
remote and there's no guarantee that somebody else on the trip might be able to hook you up with a spare or something. So bring spare fiber optic cables, extra batteries. Um, you know, Even if you have, it's good to bring two macro lenses if for no other reason, because if something goes wrong with one of them, you have a second one. Just things like that. Anything that can save your trip if something goes wrong is probably best to bring up there just because of the remoteness.
Mm.
And generally, divers on those group trips are willing to lend stuff out to people to help them out, but there's no guarantees that somebody's going to have that specific part you
Yeah.
need.
And if
Flash
you've got
trigger
those
batteries.
spares, you can help someone else out.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Flash trigger batteries are a big one because every flash trigger is a little bit different. So buy a bunch of little watch batteries, bring them with you. Trying to think what else might go wrong.
And then the other thing I would do in the run up to the trip as well is what I would do before any trip, which is get on Instagram, search for images from that part of the world. Watch our Instagram lives. I'm not sorry, Instagram lives are Instagram inspirational Instagram episodes because there's lots of Pacific Northwest shots in there. I don't know who chooses the pictures. It's him. And yeah, look up some of the great books that have been done up there. David Hall's book, Richard Salas's books from up there. Get inspiration from the photographers who've produced great bodies of work in that part of the world. Brandon Cole's been up there a lot. He's another one I'd check out his work from there. It'll give you great inspiration before the trip, so you're really ready to make the most out of the subjects when you see them.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned that I would like to touch on too is because you said with your cold hands and usually you screw on diopters, the less you have to be fiddling with your stuff, the better. So however you can streamline it or make it easier for yourself, because the cold drains your dexterity, it drains your energy, it drains your brain. So the less you have to actively do, the better. So simplify it however you can to do that. But yeah, I know we're kind of these are all kind of like warnings to people, but it's an amazing place and it's well
Yeah.
worth the effort to bring spares and all that kind of stuff and deal with the cold to be up there.
Yeah, and having taken groups up there as well, everyone gets great shots up there because
Yeah.
there's just so much opportunity to shoot. It's like a Lembe trip in that regard. Just everyone gets in front of quality subject matter, all dive every dive.
Yeah.
Maybe not everyone sees, something really rare, but the common stuff, if you haven't been to that part of the world, is rare to you.
Yeah.
And it's just fantastic for photography.
And I
So,
can guarantee if I'm on the dive, everyone else will see the giant Pacific octopus. So,
can you come on my trip as well, please? Then.
yeah. um, so yeah, it's an amazing place. I'll make some posts about the potential trips if anybody is interested in joining. I know it's kind of last minute, but the opportunity just arose. So, but I think that's probably a fine place to wrap up. Thank you, Alex, for indulging me with this, and hopefully you guys enjoyed a little bit about God's Pocket.
I'm the one wearing the t-shirt, so I'm
Yeah,
very
yeah, I
happy.
don't have one of those yet, but hopefully eventually I will. But thank you guys for watching, and we will see you the next time.